David Hilbert, the 23rd of January 1862 to the 14th of February 1943, was a German mathematician and one of the most influential mathematicians of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Hilbert discovered and developed a broad range of fundamental ideas in many areas, including invariant theory, the calculus of variations, commutative algebra, algebraic number theory, the foundations of geometry, spectral theory of operators and its application to integral equations, mathematical physics, and the foundations of mathematics, particularly proof theory. Hilbert adopted and defended Georg Cantor's set theory and transfinite numbers. In 1900, he presented a collection of problems that set the course for much of the mathematical research of the 20th century. Hilbert and his students contributed significantly to establishing rigor and developed important tools used in modern mathematical physics. Hilbert is known as one of the founders of proof theory and mathematical logic. Hilbert, the first of two children and only son of Otto and Maria Therese Ertmann Hilbert, was born in the province of Prussia, Kingdom of Prussia, either in Königsberg, according to Hilbert's own statement, or in Walo, known since 1946 as Znamensk, near Königsberg where his father worked at the time of his birth. In late 1872, Hilbert entered the Friedrichskolleg Gymnasium, Collegium Fridericianum, the same school that Immanuel Kant had attended 140 years before, but, after an unhappy period, he transferred to, late 1879, and graduated from, early 1880, the more science-oriented Wilhelm Gymnasium. Upon graduation, in autumn 1880, Hilbert enrolled at the University of Königsberg, the Albertina. In early 1882, Hermann Minkowski, 2 years younger than Hilbert and also a native of Königsberg but had gone to Berlin for 3 semesters, returned to Königsberg and entered the university. Hilbert developed a lifelong friendship with the shy, gifted Minkowski. In 1884, Adolf Hurwitz arrived from Göttingen as an extraordinarius, i.e., an associate professor. An intense and fruitful scientific exchange among the three began, and Minkowski and Hilbert especially would exercise a reciprocal influence over each other at various times in their scientific careers. Hilbert obtained his doctorate in 1885, with a dissertation, written under Ferdinand von Lindemann, titled Über invariante Eigenschaften spezieller binarer Formen, insbesondere der Kugelfunktionen, on the invariant properties of special binary forms, in particular the spherical harmonic functions. Hilbert remained at the University of Königsberg as a Privatdozent, senior lecturer, from 1886 to 1895. In 1895, as a result of intervention on his behalf by Felix Klein, he obtained the position of professor of mathematics at the University of Göttingen. During the Klein and Hilbert years, Göttingen became the preeminent institution in the mathematical world. He remained there for the rest of his life. Among Hilbert's students were Hermann Weyl, chess champion Emanuel Lasker, Ernst Zermelo, and Carl Gustav Hempel. John von Neumann was his assistant. At the University of Göttingen, Hilbert was surrounded by a social circle of some of the most important mathematicians of the 20th century, such as Emmy Noether and Alonzo Church. Among his 69 PhD students in Göttingen were many who later became famous mathematicians, including, with date of thesis, Otto Blumenthal, 1898, Felix Bernstein, 1901, Hermann Weyl, 1908, Richard Courant, 1910, Erich Heck, 1910, Hugo Steinhaus, 1911, and Wilhelm Ackermann, 1925. Between 1902 and 1939 Hilbert was editor of the Mathematische Annalen, the leading mathematical journal of the time. Good, he did not have enough imagination to become a mathematician. Hilbert's response upon hearing that one of his students had dropped out to study poetry. In 1892, Hilbert married Käthe Jarasch, 1864 to 1945, who was the daughter of a Königsberg merchant, an outspoken young lady with an independence of mind that matched. While at Königsberg they had their one child, Franz Hilbert, 1893 to 1969. Franz suffered throughout his life from an undiagnosed mental illness. His inferior intellect was a terrible disappointment to his father, and this misfortune was a matter of distress to the mathematicians and students at Göttingen. Hilbert considered the mathematician Hermann Minkowski to be his best and truest friend. Hilbert was baptized and raised a Calvinist in the Prussian Evangelical Church. He later left the church and became an agnostic. He also argued that mathematical truth was independent of the existence of God or other a priori assumptions. When Galileo Galilei was criticized for failing to stand up for his convictions on the heliocentric theory, Hilbert objected, but was not an idiot. Only an idiot could believe that scientific truth needs martyrdom. that may be necessary in religion, but scientific results prove themselves in due time. Like Albert Einstein, Hilbert had closest contacts with the Berlin group whose leading founders had studied under Hilbert in Göttingen, Kurt Grelling, Hans Reichenbach and Walter Dubislav. Around 1925, Hilbert developed pernicious anemia, a then untreatable vitamin deficiency whose primary symptom is exhaustion. His assistant Eugene Wigner described him as subject to enormous fatigue and how he seemed quite old, and that even after eventually being diagnosed and treated, he was hardly a scientist after 1925, and certainly not a Hilbert. Hilbert lived to see the Nazis purge many of the prominent faculty members at University of Göttingen in 1933. Those forced out included Hermann Weyl, who had taken Hilbert's chair when he retired in 1930, Emmy Noether and Edmund Landau. One who had to leave Germany, Paul Bernays, had collaborated with Hilbert in mathematical logic, and co-authored with him the important book Grundlagen der Mathematik, which eventually appeared in 2 volumes, in 1934 and 1939. This was a sequel to the Hilbert-Ackermann book Principles of Mathematical Logic from 1928. Hermann Weyl's successor was Helmut Haas. About a year later, Hilbert attended a banquet and was seated next to the new Minister of Education, Bernhard Rust. Rust asked whether the Mathematical Institute really suffered so much because of the departure of the Jews. Hilbert replied, "Suffered? It doesn't exist any longer, does it?" By the time Hilbert died in 1943, the Nazis had nearly completely restaffed the university, as many of the former faculty had either been Jewish or married to Jews. Hilbert's funeral was attended by fewer than a dozen people, only 2 of whom were fellow academics, among them Arnold Sommerfeld, a theoretical physicist and also a native of Königsberg. News of his death only became known to the wider world 6 months after he died. The epitaph on his tombstone in Göttingen consists of the famous lines he spoke at the conclusion of his retirement address to the Society of German Scientists and Physicians on the 8th of September 1930. The words were given in response to the Latin maxim, ignoramus et ignorabimus, or we do not know, we shall not know, wir müssen wissen. We must know, wir werden wissen, we will know. The day before Hilbert pronounced these phrases at the 1930 annual meeting of the Society of German Scientists and Physicians, Kurt Gödel, in a roundtable discussion during the Conference on Epistemology held jointly with the Society meetings, tentatively announced the first expression of his incompleteness theorem. Gödel's incompleteness theorems show that even elementary axiomatic systems such as Peano arithmetic are either self-contradicting or contain logical propositions that are impossible to prove or disprove.